Our next speaker has been studying Nepenthes very intensively since 2004. We mainly know him, of course, well, the first thing he really popped into my mind anyways was with the description of Bocorensis, the Nepenthes Bocorensis, and the pictures he showed about it, and also the habitat destruction he showed a couple of months later. He's here to talk about the Nepenthes of Indochina. Please welcome Francois Mai.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me? Yes. Yeah, very well? Okay. So thanks for attending to this lecture. So like Marcel said, I got interested in carnivorous plants about 6 years ago. I was tried to grow them, and I started with a Venus flytrap like most of us. And quite quickly I got interested in the genus Nepenthes, and I wanted to travel. First, I wanted to go to Madagascar to see the fields of Nepenthes madagascariensis. And because my family roots are in Indochina, I tried to visit that place. With the word Indochina, you refer mainly to 3 or 4 countries. Vietnam, of course, Cambodia, Laos, and sometimes Thailand. And I decided to go there. I decided to refer to the known literature on Nepenthes. And I realized that the literature was really scarce. There was not many articles and papers about that. And in 2007, I found a plant which was not previously known to science, but I described last year, namely Nepenthes bocorensis. And for the last couple of years, several papers have come out, and with a description of several species of Nepenthes. I realized that most of the species are not very well known to the large audience, but also to most of the taxonomists. So the aim of this lecture today will be to explain the differences, to explain what are the new species, the differences between those species. Most of them are quite similar, and to maybe to explain more about the botanical history about this part of the world. And I will have also some things to say about conservation in that part of the globe. So this is a map you may be familiar with. It was first published in Stewart McPherson Picture Plants of the Old World books. So this is the distribution, the known distribution of the genus Nepenthes in the world. Some of you who are familiar with the genus know that there are 2 or 3 centers of diversity. You have, of course, the big islands of Borneo and Sumatra, and we lately discovered many new taxa in the Philippines as well. So sorry, I have to get myself familiar with that. This one, yeah. So Indochina is not a word that you're supposed to use these days. It was a word used when this part of the world was a French colony. The country belonged to the French for almost 60 or 70 years, and most of the material collected in those 3-4 countries are deposited in Paris Herbarium. So, as you can see, this is more or less the northern part of the distribution. There are more or less 30 species from Borneo, Sumatra, 25 from Philippines, and species like Nepenthes raja, Burbidge, villosa are well known to the hobbyists and taxonomists, but names like kampotiana, anamensis, Torellia, of course, Geoffrey, Smileyzy, may be known from people, but who can really say what they are? So we tried with a friend Marcello Catalano from Italy to study this genus in Indochina. And today I'm here to present the result of a research. So this is a map of Indochina. These last 3-4 years, I spent a lot of time in the field in Cambodia and in Vietnam. I was born in Vietnam more than 30 years ago, and my parents moved in France, but I was born just here in the border, we had the Khmer Rouge regime who slaughtered about a third of the population, and my parents moved there. And so there's a few Nepenthes there. Marcelo Catalano spent the last 10 years studying the species of Thailand. We know almost nothing about Laos. I did find some specimens of Nepenthes from Laos, but we don't know. There's no real botanist who study the genus in that country, and I know almost nothing about Nepenthes in Myanmar. I think the widespread Nepenthes mirabilis must occur there, but there is no official record as far as I know. So you've got the Gulf of Thailand, just there, the Andaman Sea, it is the name along the Thailand peninsula, and the South China Sea. Cambodia is quite a small country, and Thailand is the biggest around. So with the word Indochina, we used to refer to those three countries. Thailand was not a colony, but for purpose of convenience, when I talk about Indochina, I refer to the whole peninsula. So this is the current list of species of Nepenthes in Indochina. I think that you know some of these species of those names quite well. You've got species like gracilis, ampularia, mirabilis, and even sanguinea. Apart from mirabilis, you have to know that ampularia, gracilis, and sanguinea are really rare in that peninsula. They only occur in Thailand. They are not known from Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam. You have the widespread mirabilis that you can find in the four countries, and you have other species that occur in Thailand only or in the three other countries. And in the last 2 years, there have been quite a few species or taxa described. You may have heard some of these names, but I think that most of the names are not familiar to your ears. This year, at the beginning of this year, Nepenthes andamana was described because it grows, of course, along the coast of the Andaman Sea. You have Nepenthes chang, which occurs in the island of Chang, Ko Chang. There's a species called Nepenthes kerrii, named after botanist Kerr, who extensively prospected and collected in Thailand and surrounding countries. You have also Nepenthes serratensis from the Surat province of Thailand. You have Nepenthes thai, recently described by Martin Schick and Matthew Jebb at the beginning of the year. You have Nepenthes mirabilis var globosa. That's the official name now for the plant known as Viking or Nepenthes globosa in culture. Marcelo Catalano decided that it's not a species but a mere variety. And you have this new species, Nepenthes holdeni, that is published just now. Maybe this afternoon, Stuart McPherson will bring his new books. And at the end of the second volume, there are 4 new species of Nepenthes described, one of them being a Nepenthes holdeni. It is a new species from the cardamom mountains of Cambodia. So we'll mainly focus my lecture on the barely known species. I won't explain something about ampularia, gracilis, and mirabilis just a bit. So I hope that at the end of the lecture you will understand more of the differences between the species. If you have a question throughout the lecture, you can interrupt me. So this is the first species that I want to introduce you to. Nepenthes thai, it was called for the country Thailand, of course. The name was in apposition, that's why they didn't call it Thaiana, for instance. So it's very close to another, taxonomically speaking, to another species, Nepenthes benstonii, that maybe some of you have in their grow list in cultivation. It occurs only in Peninsula Thailand, just at the border between Thailand and Peninsula Malaysia. And maybe last year it was introduced in cultivation as a Nepenthes spec narrativat from the Narathiwat province. So if you have some spec narrativat, please change your label as Nepenthes thai. So as you can see, it is quite an inconspicuous species. I never can pronounce that word, but I think it sounds good, so I will try. remember me a sentence from Charles Clark when he first discovered Nepenthes, when he first saw Nepenthes rhombicollis. He said that if it was the only member of a genus, it would be pretty amazing, but can be quite boring. It's got nothing really extraordinary. I still think it's a nice species. The ecology is quite interesting. So as you can see, it's kind of a mix between mirabilis and gracilis. It's kind of rare in the nature. It's been collected a few times. Actually, when Charles Clark described Nepenthes benstonii, he studied collections of Nepenthes thai, but he decided that it was within the species benstonii. But Chick and Jeb decided that it is a different species, and I will try to explain you why. So it's not a big species, because you can see the hand as a scale. So this is the lower pictures. The ecology is the species occur at intermediate levels between. You can even say lowland. It occurs on litter mostly, sometimes in full sun, sometimes in shade. You can see the habit. You have a rosette sprouting directly from the litter. You can see the leaves. They are quite subspatulate or narrowly oblong. This is the rosette, which are quite interesting to my opinion. The first time I saw this rosette, I thought it was some kind of big Nepenthes pervillae rosette, but of course they are not at all closely related. So you see the shape of the leaves is quite special. The species proved to be quite easy in cultivation. For now, I've got some specimens at home which are maybe 10 or 15 centimeters large, and right now I grow them in my garden in full sun among my Sarracenia. And of course in October, as I live in northern France, I will bring them back in the house. So for each species, I have wrote a sum up of the differences, but it's kind of boring because it's taxonomical detail. But as I wanted you to know the differences between species, I wanted to write most of the thing. This cannot replace exhaustive description. You have to find the papers. They're widely available through the net, or you can just ask me, I can send them to you. But Chick and Jeb, Martin Chick and Matthew Jeb, decided that these species differ from Nepenthes benstonii, which is not a widespread species in cultivation, by the way. Sorry, this one. Because there are difference in the hairs, the indumentum. Nepenthes stem is glabrous, there is no hair, and Nepenthes benstonii is hairy. In bold, you have the peduncle length, which are shorter in Nepenthes thai. The androphore part of the flower is also shorter. The flower color is different, red or brown in Nepenthes thai and green in Nepenthes benstonii. And you have the color of the stem, which is black tinge in Nepenthes thai and yellow in benstonii. The leaf blades maybe is a more interesting feature to distinguish the two species. Can be shorter and narrower in Nepenthes thai, and the bases sheath the stem more completely. And the apex of the blades are usually peltate, so for us grower it's more easy to make the difference. And there is also the number of longitudinal nerves which differs, and the lower pitches are different in size. Nepenthes thai pitches, lower pitches are being smaller. But if you want my opinion, it's not easy to make a difference between the two species in the field. If you have some of those differences in your mind, you can do it, or maybe you can use this one. This is quite useful. To my mind, they are as closely related as Nepenthes hirsuta, Nepenthes hispida. It's not easy. You cannot spot the differences immediately. For the untrained eyes, it's quite difficult. I talked with Charles Clark last February. We went on a field trip together in Vietnam, and he doesn't agree with that. He thinks that it should be within Nepenthes benstonii, but that's just informal talk. So I don't have a special opinion about this one. I would like to check both wild populations, but I never saw benstonii in the wild, and neither did I check Nepenthes thai, but I'm just here to report the new descriptions. So the next one is quite famous. It's a species which has been introduced in cultivation as Nepenthes viking or Nepenthes globosa. It has been described this year as Nepenthes mirabilis var globosa. We already have Nepenthes mirabilis var echinostoma, you know, the one with a large peristome. It's known from two locations in Thailand, from the mainland city of Trong and from the island of Panga in the south part of country. And the plants from the locality of Trong has been sold as Nepenthes mirabilis Trong bizarre, because the first time, I think it's Martin Schick who studied the dried specimen, he found that those mirabilis were quite bizarre, and he noted bizarre in the herbarium sheets, so the name just stuck. So if you have some Trong bizarre, I think that Rob is having some in his sale list, you should change label to mirabilis var globosa. So for each species I made a map so you can have a clear idea of the distribution. So this is the two spots for Nepenthes globosa var globosa. This is an island, the island of Panga, and this is a city of Trong. So you see it is really in the southern part of the country. This plant has been introduced in cultivation for 5 or 6 years now, and we've been waiting for the description for a long time. When you just look at the plants in culture, you think that they are not very variable. You have the impression, the feeling that they're all very globose, hence the name, and really reddish in pink. You have to bear in mind that the poacher, let's call them that way, who went in Panga, they just chose the more roundish specimens, the most beautiful to their eyes. But when Marcello Catalano went to Panga and Trong, he realized that all globosa were not as round as the ones that you can see in cultivation. There's a bit of variation, as you can see in the following pictures. Those are not representative of both populations. This is a plant. Oh, sorry. If you can't hear me, just say it, please. Sorry. Do I have to tell everything again? Oh, that's okay. Okay. I know you're all sleeping, but just pretend you're interested, please. Thanks. So this is a plant from the Trong location, and this is a plant from the Panga location. This population has been collected and introduced in culture, but as you will see, plants from both populations show a bit of variation. This is other plants from Trong. You can see it can be yellowish, greenish with a red peristome. There is something with the Chinese Nepenthes is that most of Nepenthes growers and also the others tend to think that in the Chinese species all develop red peaches. That is not true. But it's just the fact that poachers collected red plants. You have green plants, greenish plants, yellowish plants, sometimes even whitish. But it's true that the reddish or lower peaches are quite common. You have other plants from Trong. You can see that the wings in the lower pictures were quite developed. You can see in the same location you have differences between plants. So this one is mainly yellowish. This is other plants from Trong also. The plants grow in full sun, some kind of savanna with grasses or sometimes very small shrubs, and it gets sun almost all day long. And the area where the habitat where the plants grow is seasonally inundated. In Asia, maybe you don't know it, but you have mainly 2 seasons. A dry season, which occurs between, if my memory serves me right, between January and June, and you have a wet season between June and the rest of the year. So some of the habitat are flooded, completely flooded. Yeah. And some of the species have developed some features to survive to the drought. So you have other plants. The plants on the left is also a Trong plant. Plants on the right also. The reddish plants have been grown under the care of Marcello Catalano. They are grown under sodium lamp, so they are not in terrarium. They grow in 40 or 50% humidity only. If you want to try that at home, please don't do that directly. You have to get the plants used to that treatment. Maybe you put that in a bag, then you open the bag slowly after a week, and then after 2 or 3 weeks, you can have a plant completely outside. And I can assure you that some of the growers like Marcello have beautiful plants, and he doesn't need to grow them in a tank like you can see in the picture. You have another plant from Trang, that mainland population. So this one, I think, looks a lot like the mirabilis globosa that you can see in culture. And you have an upper picture. So this is quite infundibular obovate. The shape is quite characteristic. This is two plants, two upper pictures from the two populations so that you can compare. They are really similar with a really developed wings here and here. The pictures can get quite big. And I made this composition with two mirabilis. On the left, you have mirabilis var globosa. I don't know if you can really spot at what I surrounded in the circle. And on the right, you have mirabilis var mirabilis. And as far as I know, if I rely on Marcello's description and his studies and his extended field research, there is no difference between the leaves and the flowers of the two varieties. The differences really dwell on the picture. That's why he chose the variety status. I asked him, why don't you make it spaces? And he felt and he's convinced that now, because of a state of taxonomy in Nepenthes is not really clear, we don't have subspecies and only have some variety, but it would be more fitting to keep it as a variety. So there's no real difference. You can see that there are some wavy margins in the mirabilis var globosa, but you have some mirabilis var globosa without the wavy margins, and you have a var mirabilis with the wavy margins as well. So I put two lower pictures just to compare. To the untrained eyes, it might look like two species, but the pictures' characteristics are almost similar. I will sum up the differences between the lower pictures just after this. You have an upper pictures of a mirabilis, regular mirabilis on the left. The upper pictures are cylindrical, tubulose, if you want. Something there's a faint hip. And the upper pictures of globos are infundibular, like the elongated shape of a wine glass. This is the habitat of var globosa. As you can see, it grows in open sun in savanna. There's almost no shade. Some plants do climb on surrounding shrubs, but most of the time they're in the open, like this. So to sum up the differences between both varieties, so the differences are in the shape of the lower pictures. They are ovate, globose, hence the name, and you have the peristome, which is a bit different, which is really elongated, and there is a kind of a crest here, just here. And you have some differences that you can't find in globosa and that you can almost never find in mirabilis var mirabilis. As you can see here, you have curling wings in the lower picture. This is not really apparent on this one, but the wings most of the time are curling. In this, almost never appear in var mirabilis. I saw a lot of mirabilis in Cambodia and Vietnam. I myself never saw curling wings in the lower pictures of var mirabilis. The tendrils and base of lower pictures are red, even when pictures are still developing. And you have some green globosa, maybe you have some in your collection, and even the green globosa have a red tendril and have a base of the pictures which are red as well. The picture hip are absent or located in the upper half for both types of pictures, and it's completely different with variety mirabilis, and you have a difference of the shape of the upper pictures. The glands distribution can be slightly different too. Glands under the lid are nearly absent along the midline, and they're usually present in var mirabilis. But this is really detailed taxonomical detail. If you want, as a mere grower, distinguish the two varieties, you just have to get a look at the pictures. But I'm sure that if I cut the pictures of a mirabilis var globosa and the pictures of mirabilis var mirabilis, and I introduce you to both plants, you will have a hell of difficulty to say which one is what. I think you couldn't. So I will introduce you now to the next species, This morning, Alan Laurie introduced us to a fascinating group of complex for Drosera, and we just, with the co-authors of the last paper, define an aggregate, which is a word botanists use for a group of closely related species. And we decided that all those species, the one in black and the one in light orange, belong to the same group, like a complex if you want, but we call that an aggregate. So you have Nepenthes andamana, Bocorensis, Chung, Haldenii, the new one, that you will discover in Macpherson and Stewart book. Kampotiana, which is an old name that you may be familiar with. I will really explain you what the species is. Carrii, Smilesy. Smilesy is the right name for Anamensis. If you have Anamensis, you have to change. Ceratensis and Torellii. We considered that all those 9 species belong to the same taxonomical group. So what are the links, the common features of these species? You can see in black what I considered as common points between the different species. Most of the time they produce reddish flower pictures, but as I told you, that's not completely true, but most of the time. They all share long racemose inflorescence. For those in the audience not very familiar with that word, it means that the flower, the inflorescence, is long, just like a thin tube. You have no flowers as a panicle, you know. So all those places have a really long inflorescence. You don't have a short spike like for some species. Most of the time, they have the ability, when needed, to flower at rosette stage. That means that they can flower even if they don't have the time to produce upper pictures. So that means that sometimes you have a striking sight of a rosette plants with a long spikes, which is quite unusual in the genus. Most of the time, maybe, I don't know, 80% or more of the time, Nepenthes need to produce upper pictures and to climb before they can flower. And the species of a Nepenthes Torellii aggregate, which is the name we use for that group of species, can flower at rosette stage. The seeds are really short. They have reduced filiform appendages. If you have already sown Nepenthes seeds, you know that they look like small hairs. If you just, how do you say that? Sneeze? Yeah? Yeah, they can fly quite easily. But the seed from the Nepenthes from the Torellii aggregate are really short. I will show you a picture. The leaves are narrow most of the time. You don't have large leaves like Nepenthes regia or Nepenthes bulbicae, for instance. And they are quite thick, coriaceous. And the leaf attachment is decurrent. If you're not familiar with that word, I will explain everything later. I'll try to get people have interesting information for both taxonomists or hobbyists in the room. They have what we call pyrophytic habit. That means that they are resistant to drought and to fires, just like some species of, just like Roridula or Biblis. They do not depend on fire, but they can cope with fire, and they sometimes like the drought because it can eradicate some competing plants. So we call them pyrophytes, and they produce a thickened rootstock. That's what is really amazing in that group of plants. If some of you have a garden here, you may have already planted dahlia. You know, the big dahlia, big colorful flowers with roots, tubers that you keep at home in winter. Those Nepenthes species have the same kind of roots that I will show you later. In the wet season, they look like normal Nepenthes, and in the dry season, most of them look like dead. All you can see is dead leaves. And when the first downpours occur, they grow back, just like they regenerate, just like a bit like some tuberous Drosera. And most of the time, so they produce slower pitches. So this is a typical racemose inflorescence. This is Nepenthes smilesy. This is really typical. See, it's very long. You have small flowers. Almost all the flowers of the aggregate of a group are one flower. You have one flower. If you're familiar with Nepenthes, you know that some species like Ampullaria, bicalcarata, or the species of the outlying areas, you know, Madagascariensis, Pervelae, Distillatoria, Casiana, they have several flowers. on one pedicel. Most of the time, the species of Indochina, of the pyrophyte species, have this kind of flowers. Can you hear me? No problem? That's fine? Okay. And this is a flowering plants. So like I told you, they can flower even at the rosette stage. You don't have appendages yet. And this side is quite common when you go to Indochina. It's not exceptional. It's not like an ecotype of something. You can see that in all the species of a group. And this is quite fascinating because apart from a few plants, just like the flowering campanulata that you could see in the exhibition, you're not really used to that side. You're really used to see appendages with flowers. This is a short seed. This is a kind of comparison that one friend of mine, an American grower, Tom Cal, made a few years ago. I made some red crosses here because at the time he didn't know the differences between the species. So what he called Nepenthes is in fact smilesy. So that means that those two seed pods and those two groups of seeds belong to the same species. You could guess, because they look identical. And this is what he thought was Torellii, and he now knows that is kampotiana crossed with mirabilis. This is mirabilis, this is meriliana from Philippines, and ventricosa from Luzon, Philippines also. And as you can see, species of the Torellii aggregate have really short seeds. If you give me, apart maybe from a few exceptions, seeds from the Torellii aggregate, I can more or less guess that it's from that part of the world. I would say that this is typical Nepenthes seed. You have some strange seed. Nepenthes pervillei seeds is fantastic, but this is really, really special. If you ask me why the seeds are short, frankly, I don't know. Some work needed to understand why. I know the season, the dry season, is really hard for those plants. Maybe the seed are, let's say, devised to fall in crevices and get some humidity from the small holes. I don't know, but that's mere suppositions from me. I don't know why the seeds are short, but what I found is that they are short for all the species of the group. And the leaves look like this. They are kind of narrow, kind of thick in texture. This is a picture of a newly described Nepenthes holdenii. You can see the plants can be quite large. This leaves is more or less 45 centimeters. The leaf attachment is Decurrent. For the layman, the leaf attachment is an important feature to distinguish species. You have species like Maxima. They have what we call a petiole, like a short stick, if you want, which attaches the leaves, the lamina with the stem. With all the species of the aggregate, Nepenthes Torellii aggregate, we have decurrent leaves. That means that the leaves turn into two wings running down the stem, just like this as well. So if you grow Nepenthes rainwartiana at home, you may have seen this before. It's really easy to see that in that species. So this is easy. So do not confuse with mirabilis. Not so long ago, people told me, or when I read old papers, people told me that the Nepenthes of a Torellii aggregate look like mirabilis. It's confusing. When you go in the field, when you have both mirabilis and a pyrophyte plant in front of you, you cannot confuse. The leaves have almost nothing in common. Mirabilis has clear petiole like this. And the leaves are soft, they are papery, just like paper. And the leaves of a species of a Torellii aggregate, they are, like I said before, decurrent, sessile or subpetiolate, not the same at all. If you have doubt at home, if you have a mirabilis, just check this. You have a petiole and it's papery, and sometimes, but not always, when the plant is young, you have a small hairs on the margins of the leaf. So this is for me, the best way to not confuse the species. Just have to look at the leaf attachment. And this is maybe the most striking feature of this aggregate, this group of species, is tuber roots. As you see, they don't have normal roots. They have tubers, just like potatoes, just like the tubers of dahlia, and they have kind of short, very short roots, short hairs, not many. And like I told you, in the dry season, it can be 50 degrees, the soil can be really, really hot, and most of the plants die. They look like dead. 30 years ago, when the first US growers get their hands on some Indochina plants, they thought the plants were dead, and almost all the growers just put their plants in the bin, in the trash. They thought the plants were dead. And now we know that if you don't water your plants for a long time in cultivation, the plants look like that. But if you water it again, just come back, but don't throw it away. But what I saw, that is in cultivation, you don't need to dry the soil. If you keep the soil dry for all year long, the plant continue to dry. It doesn't seem like it's the dormancy is necessary, just like an adaptation to the environment. That's all. I have people who grow species from this aggregate, from this group for years and years and years now without any dormancy, and the plants are fine. It's not like they're going to die or short-lived or something. So Tom Cal, my American friends, sent me some pictures of tuberroots of Nepenthes kampotiana. I will explain you later what this species is. And so as you can see, it's just like a pack of tubers. And what Tom usually does when he wants to divide species is that he doesn't take cuttings or divide plants. He just divide roots without any stem here. And he just take a bunch of root. I'm just smiling a bit because I think he's just like he's slaughtering the plants, and he just put a part of the roots in pot with wet substrate, and after a while, I don't know, maybe after a month, a few weeks, you have sprouts, new growth emerging from the rootstock, and you have quite soon new plants. So that's quite interesting for horticulture, I think. Yeah. And those plants are really, because of a habitat, they are very, really tolerant for low humidity. I don't have pictures here, I just forgot one at home. It's a shame, but I grow most of the species of the aggregate outside in summer. When I have to get some pelargonium for my garden, I used to get all my Torellia aggregate species outside in the garden, and I bring them back in October. I did that for 2 years, 3 years now, and they're doing just fine. I don't know if some people in the audience have some Decurrences, but I have a Decurrences which is 60 centimeters high and 50 centimeters large now, and I do not use our smoke coat. I have nothing against it. Just to say that outside with a large pot, full sun with Sarracenia, just thrives completely. And Tom is growing his kampotiana also outside, and sometimes he told me that the humidity can get quite low. So it's quite interesting, I think. And the problem with, it's maybe an advantage, but it's a problem too. As you know, many of the plants in cultivation have been labeled as kampotiana, anamensis, Torellia with the wrong ID. And the problem is that those plants are quite easy in cultivation. They have been heavily used for hybridation. So the quality of the plant has become kind of a flaw, because now the wrong plant with the wrong ID are really spread in cultivation. Anyway, they make good parents for hybrids or good house plants because they can cope with low humidity. So most of the time, the lower pitches are reddish, and if you're not trying, you might find them similar, but without being insulting, because I love almost all genus of carnivorous plants. When you're not trained, you cannot really find differences in other groups of plants. Let's say yellow Utricularia or rosette rosera. I don't know, but reddish lower pitches. Maybe if you just watch details, you can say that. Oh, this one has a huge lead. This one has a huge mouth. This one is like smaller. So anyway, I'll explain you every difference. When the plants are dried, you can also clearly spot the differences between the species. You have 3 species there. You have Decurrent. You can easily recognize the shape of a lead. There are many differences, but I just tell you the most obvious. So the lead is apple-shaped or orbicular with a cordate base, if you want. Smiley is most of the time tubulose, cylindrical with a faint hint most of the time, and the newly described Holdinea is infundibular. Yeah. And we have another big differences with the other species of the aggregate is that it's two-flowered in both male and female inflorescences. So this is the first species that Marcello described. He described 4 species in the book he published at the beginning of the year, Nepenthes of Thailand. He published it in Italian, but the descriptions are in English. So he named it after the Andaman Sea, and this species is endemic to the regions of the Panga provinces. It's the same region where we could find Nepenthes globosa, mirabilis globosa. So this is what I call a typical Torrelia aggregate species. It's got nothing particular. It's most of the time like ovate here, cylindrical up there. It's got whitish, yellowish upper pitches. So it grows here. Here in the town of Tacuapa, it's the same province that Nepenthes Viking mirabilis globosa. And so far, Marcello only found that species there. So it's an endemic. It's a lowland species. You can see the species, the lower pitches can be quite different. If you compare that with the red one with the previous pitches, it can be quite different. Sometimes the upper pitches can be striped in the peristome. This is what the plants look like in the wild. It grows in savanna, just like var globosa as well. And you can see standing upper pitches a bit like Nepenthes madagascariensis. And they all, most of the time, they're yellowish, like this. This is a kind of close-up. You see this is a typical, this is typical leaves of Indochinese plants. Most of the time they look the same if you don't closely examine them. So Nepenthes andamana has always tubular, yellowish, whitish upper pitches like this. This is a rosette. It grows in sand. At home, you can grow the species of this aggregate in pure sand if you want. That's how they grow in the wild, most of them. But from my experience, growing them in pure sand is quite difficult in cultivation because once the sand is completely dried, it's quite hard to water it again. So I tend to mix it with something else, some other compounds. So this is another rosette of Nepenthes andamana, and here you have a picture taken at the beginning of a wet season. If you watch closely, you can see the dead vines of a dry season. You can see the climbing vines. The plants look like they're dead. And at the beginning of a wet season, when the rains come back, just like by magic, you have a new plant. So how do you make differences between this species and the other species of the aggregate? So this one, if you go to Tacuapa, in the town where it occurs, you know that it's andamana. But if you have it at home, I would find that the easiest way to make the difference is to ask for location. If you don't have a location, you have to check all those boring taxonomical details. So the leaves are linear to lanceolate. You have also the indumentum, the hairs. They are caducous and they're limited to the upper part of the plants. The rosette and lower pitches always look like this, you know, kind of ovate here, cylindrical above. The peristome, the mouth, if you want, is cylindrical here. And it's rarely bigger than this. I mean, it's only about 1/3 or 1/4 of the length of the pitcher. You see? The mouth is not really big. The upper pitchers, like you saw before, they are tubulose or sometimes narrowly infundibular, and they are whitish. And the peristome has, according to the description, always this shape. You have a margin of a peristome which are lobed like this, just like the peristome didn't fold completely. This is a stable feature. This is the species I described last year that I found in 2007. It's quite, so it grows in southern Cambodia in Mount Bokor. The word Phnom means hill in Khmer, and it occurs between 800 and then 1,000 meters high. It's been collected a few times in the past. The oldest collected specimens were collected back in the early beginning of the 20th century, but people just labeled it as a Torellia or sometimes as distillatoria from India. So when I went in Bokor 3 years ago, I found that the species didn't fit with what we couldn't read of a description available at the time. This is the biggest species of the aggregate. The upper pitches can reach up to 35 centimeters high, so can be quite impressive. As far as I know, it's endemic to this place. Phnom Boko is a huge plateau, just like a big tapestry. In fact, it's 70 kilometers long, and when you go up there, you have a great view on the Gulf of Thailand. It's kind of a touristy place, actually. When I searched through the internet, I found some species of pitcher plants from southern Cambodia, and they were Bokorensis, but people didn't know what it was. And I suspect that it might grow somewhere in the mountain range here, but there's no official record, and I found no herbarium material of this species. So now it's supposed to be endemic from this mountain. So I called it after the mountain, of course. So this is some of the rosette pitchers and the rosette plants. The habitat is quite different. It's the elevation is much higher. It's almost a highland plant. It can grow sometimes between rocks in full sun, sometimes in partial shade of surrounding shrub and trees. What is really typical for the species is this vaulted peristome. If you have in mind Nepenthes raja, you know that the peristome is vaulted like this. Of course, it's not as impressive in Nepenthes bokorensis, but it's like this. One of my friends just told me that it's like a wok, for Asian cooking, and it's quite characteristic of a species. And here you have a nice plant with lower and upper pitchers. You can see that the dimorphism in the species is really pronounced. No wonder that 1 century ago they thought that Nepenthes were several species. So you can see the huge lead here and the yellowish upper pitchers. See another couple of upper pitchers. The peristome is often striped like this. This is quite an impressive sight. These upper pitchers were more or less 30 centimeters long. This is other upper pitchers. You can see a bit of variation, and almost all the time the peristome is large, striped, and you have a vaulted leaf like this. That's a good feature if you want to recognize the species. And sometimes, from time to time, you can find a specimen like this one, which I find quite interesting, because it's almost like the back of the pitchers is a bit vaulted, when the pitchers is not really open. It look a bit like Aristolochoides, but not as spectacular, of course. So this is two plants grown in different conditions. The first one on the left was found in full sun, completely full sun, and the other one in partial shade. As you can see, the leaves grew larger, but the upper pitchers are still colorful. See here, yeah. This is a typical habitat of Bokorensis, so you see it's quite different of the savanna of Nepenthes andamana or Nepenthes globosa, var globosa, of course. Most of the time during the day you have a lot of mist all around. The humidity is quite high in the wet season, of course. You have sphagnum. You have many carnivorous plant species. I found up there Utricularia uliginosa, bifida, odorata, minutissima. I also found nice population of Drosera peltata, which is no wonder, because Nepenthes Torellia, Nepenthes bokorensis is a pyrophyte too. It's got rootstock too. This looks like a wet habitat, but it is seasonally dry. Completely dry, I think, for two months because of a high elevation. One of Stuart McPherson's friends went in March on Phnom Boko, and he sent me some pictures of plants, and they were half dead, and they just come back from the dead in the wet season. But most of the time it's quite humid, and you have a lot of mist all around. So how to recognize it from the all the other species of a group, of the aggregate. I think the easiest feature is the shape of a leaf. It's got leaf larger than the other species of the aggregate. And the attachment is only slightly decurrent. As I told you before, most of the time the attachment looks like two wings running down the stem, and for Bocorensis it's just slightly decurrent. Like I told you before also, the lower picture and upper pictures are vaulted, and the peristome is often striped. Sometimes, I would say 40–50% of the time, you have two-flowered on the flowers, but not all the time. I examined maybe 300 specimens. I went on Bocor 4 times, and you cannot find always plants with two flowers. The pitchers are more robust. Like I told you, it can be up to 35 centimeters for the upper pitchers. And so about the ecology, it's more or less an intermediate plant. In cultivation, I've heard that some growers manage to grow it as a pure lowland plant, while others grow it as highland with quite a success. I find that my own plants grow very well at the moment now outside, because during the day it's quite warm, and in the night you have a drop in the temperature, so they're really thriving right now. So this is Nepenthes chung, described by Catalano. It's endemic too. It's from the Bantat Mountains. It's not far from the Cambodian border. It occurs between 300 and 600 meters above sea level. As you see, the upper pitchers are quite, I would say, usual for that group of species, tuberose, yellowish, and the lower pitchers are most of the time yellowish and pink. I think that Marcello didn't find any real red pitchers. So it occurs in 2 places: the island of Koh Chang. Koh means island in Thai. This is quite a touristy place. And the Khao Quap, this is quite a dangerous place. Marcello Catalano couldn't go there because it's heavily mined because of conflicts between Cambodian and Thai people. So Marcello couldn't check this location, but he the botanist Care went there and he collected some specimen a while ago. And Marcello finds that these plants are the same, and he's convinced it's a distinct species, and he called it Nepenthes chung. So it's very localized. It's not threatened in the wild, maybe in Koh Chang, but not here. You can't have access to this place. So most of the time, the lower pitchers look like this. They are pinkish, orange. You have the upper pitchers, which are green, yellowish, sometimes really slight red stripes. This is a typical habitat. It's completely different from most of the other species of the aggregate. Actually, the plants grow just like Nepenthes sumatrana, Nepenthes longifolia, under trees in partial shade. As you can see here, it grows under bamboos. So it's not at all under full sun. Yeah? Okay, go, hurry. And another pictures here. So you can see the habitat. It grows on steep ridges. So if you want to see the differences, relies on the attachment, the indumentum. The lower pitchers are quite small. Like this is typical Nepenthes chung pictures. Marcello sent me loads of pictures of his species, and they look more or less always the same, like this. If you want more details about the differences, I can tell you later. This is the newly described species, Nepenthes holdenii. I chose to name it after the photographer and biologist Jeremy Holden, who studied extensively Cambodia, Sumatra, and the southeast part of Asia. This is quite a distinct species in the group. It looks superficially like Nepenthes gymnomphora. It occurs in one place in the Cardamom Mountains. It's very localized. It occurs on two peaks only. The lower pitchers can be quite different sometimes, and can be quite big. It grows in a very dry area. Actually, it might be the species in the genus which is the more resistant to a drought, because where it grows, the drought occurs for 4 months, 4 consecutive months. And the villagers down the mountains told me that sometimes for 2 months they don't have a drop of rain. So this is some upper pictures of Nepenthes holdenii. You can see quite a variation. You have a maroon plant on the right and a pinkish on the left, a green one, beautiful pink one also. This is a habitat shot of Nepenthes holdeni in the Cardamom Mountains. You can see it's really dry. It grows with ant plants from the Hypnophytum genus and also Dichidia rafflesiana. It was really a hell to climb that place. Typically, the new leaves of Nepenthes holdeni have a different color, as you can see. Maybe if you grow Nepenthes truncata at home, you may have noticed that sometimes the new leaves are this color. It's the same thing for this species. So this is the typical habitat. Steep, very steep ridges. It was really hard to take some decent pictures. You have another pictures of the habitat, and other pictures of a typical growth. You see here the dead vines of a dry season. The species can reach up to 5-6 meters high, and you have a new growth at the wet season. So I will just pass it. The main difference is in the flowers. The flowers are two flowers, just like, for instance, Nepenthes sanguinea in Peninsular Malaysia. But you have lots of differences. The peristome is sinuate as well. And you have differences in the shape, in dimension right now. But it's quite easy to make the difference. This is Nepenthes kampotiana, described by Lecomte a while ago. The name is quite common in culture, but most of the time people don't know what it's like. It has been collected in the Kampote province. Unfortunately, we don't know where it was collected in Kampote because Geoffrey, the guy, the botanist who collected, just wrote Kampote. So it's also known from Trat province. It's pear-shaped, just like a small pear. It's quite easy to recognize it. It's completely glabrous. It means there is no hair on the plants, apart from the peaches and tendrils, which are usually hairy in the genus. So this is typical kampotiana. The tendrils are really long. You have kampotiana with upper pitches. So you see, by looking at the leaves, it's hard to tell the differences between most of the species. But if you look at the details, that's okay. It can climb up to 6-7 meters high. Have yellowish upper pitches. And so the main difference is in the shape of the leaves. Very long and completely glabrous. Look a bit like Nepenthes glabrata, although they are nothing in common. This is another species described by Marcello in Thailand, Nepenthes carrii. This is quite a particular species. The lower pitches are quite boring. They look like all the other species of the group. But the habitat is quite strange. We cannot see that very well. It grows in Adang. It's an island. And the habitat is very, very, very hot. It grows almost on rocks, and it's very windy. I found that the plant reacts differently in cultivation. I cannot grow that plant. It's too hard. Most of my seedlings die. Marcello said that it's the same thing for him. I think, if my memory serves me right, that Andreas Wistuba told me that this species react differently in tissue culture than the other species of the aggregate as well. So the upper pitches are yellowish, and most of the time the under the lid is reddish. And the easiest way to make the difference is in the shape of a leaf. Here you have the habitat. Here, it's what we call obovate. Sorry, obovate. It's like this, not narrow like the others. This is Nepenthes smilesi. I'll make it quick, Marcel. This is the species that was used to be called Nepenthes anamensis after Annam, Vietnam. We realized that Nepenthes smilesi, described in 1895, and Nepenthes anamensis, described in 1908, were the same plants. So because of rules of priority, now we have to call it Nepenthes smilesi. That's a good name. It's been described before. It is really widespread. It is very adaptable species. It can grow at sea level. I found it in Cambodia in sea level, and you can find it in Dalat in Vietnam in 1,500 meters, so it's a highland plant. But most of the time you find it at 600 or 800 meters high. It's a real pyrophyte. Most of the time, the areas where it grows are burned. It's not very clear here, but you can find some trace of charcoal on the pictures. The area has been burned recently. Sometimes pictures the peristome are raised like this, but it's not a regular feature. Plants like this have been collected and have been introduced as Torrelii, as cultivation, because they were beautiful in red. And this is habitat of smiles in Cambodia, and in Cambodia too, in 600 meters high. It grows with pine, in pine forest, just like in Thailand. So I just passed this thing. This is one of the two last species that I want to introduce you to. Nepenthes suratensis. The easiest way to recognize it is the shape, the triangular shape of the mouth and the size. Most of all the time, the mouth is 1/3 or 1/2 of a picture length. It occurs in a Suratani province here. You see the size of the mouth? I think it's quite clear. If you have a tiger, Nepenthes tiger or Torrelii from Surat province, it's Suratensis. And of course, you have some other taxonomical detail. But if you're really interested, I think you will find the description. If not, the size of the mouth will be enough. So you see all the pictures are not red. Have some kind of difference too. The upper pictures don't have anything in special. Suratensis habitat here. And here Marcello collected several lower pictures, so you can see that it's constant. The mouth is different plants, of course. The mouth is triangular, it's got big size in proportion of a lower picture. So this is the species, and I will end with this, which is the most known in culture, Nepenthes Torrelii. It's been a source of confusion for hobbyists, horticulturists, and taxonomists, of course, for all the 20th century. These pictures are quite boring. These are the types, the dried specimen. When you describe a plant, you must have now a type. They dwell in Paris. There are several types. They were collected 1,050 years ago. It has been collected here. And I have added a point here because it may grow there. It has been collected by Dr. Clovis Torel. It was a French medic. He went in Cochinchina, it was the old name for Vietnam, and he was a real fanatic of plants, and between 1862 and 1866 he extensively collected many plants as he could during his free time. Here you have an illustration of him collecting epiphytic orchids. I bet that some of you crazy guys have already been in trees. If you didn't, you don't know what real life is. And he wanted to write the flora of Vietnam, but he didn't have enough money. He wanted to do that with Dr. Pierre, you might know. And, but he didn't have enough money, so he returned to Paris, and a few years before he died, he gave all his 500 material Voucher specimens to Paris Herbarium. And 50, there, Paul-Henri Lecomte, one of the French botanists, described Nepenthes Torrelii. Unfortunately, by studying the specimen, I realized that Paul-Henri Lecomte didn't select any type, because at the time it was not necessary. So he just had some Torrelii dried material in front of him, and he made a description. Unfortunately, I checked all the material, and I realized that he described it with 3 different species. It's like you have, I don't know, Drosera aliciae, Drosera, let's say Trinervia, Drosera, another one, rosette of Cistiflora, and you make one description. So you describe a kind of chimera monster. So because there was no type. But fortunately, in 1997, Jabenchik chose a type. They lectotypified, and they chose a good plant. So Torrelii is a plant that will match that type. If you find a plant which is the same, but this one chosen by Jabenchik, it's Torrelii. And in the course of the 20th century, most of the people just said, we don't understand. Most of the plants called kampotiana, anamensis, or Torrelii, they're similar, but they're different. They're sometimes completely round, they're elongated, they have large leaves, narrow leaves. Doesn't make much sense. So I will make this really short. All the plants that you have in cultivation under the name Torelli or not Torelli, they are either kampotiana, Smilesia, bocorensis. Why? Because those species, those 3 species, were the most easy to find in the wild. So Torellii is one of these species. If you want to have a whole story, when Stewart will bring his book, in the appendix, I wrote a really long paper on the story of that species. It's really, really boring, something like 20 pages long, but you will know everything in detail. So, and I find, this is for Jan, I found some more types in Paris which fit the description of Torelli. So thanks to that, I made an amended description. So you can see the pictures are quite different, and thanks to all those types, I made a drawing. So if you go to holidays in Vietnam and you find plants like this, really globose like Viking, but with this kind of leaves, with a kind of attachment, and upper pictures like a bit of elongated Aristolochides, then you have to phone me because it's Torellii. And in November 2009, some Vietnamese kids posted pictures of, I'm not allowed to show you that, but let's forget it. They posted some pictures on the internet, and when I saw that, my heart just jumped. I said, that fits the Torellii material that I saw in Paris. You have a globose pictures, and you have a pyrophyte leaves. This, to my opinion, this fits with Torellii, but I wanted to behave like a scientist, but I'm not, but I wanted to go there to compare the population with the dried specimen to make sure that we can say that Torellii is rediscovered. You see? I don't know if maybe I could understand that they all look the same for you, but it's really different. They're really globose, and the leaves are completely different. This is the habitat. We went there with Dr. Charles Clark. There was a lot of mirabilis, Drosera indica, reddish one, a lot of utricularia, but we found no Torellii. And the reason was, according to the villager, is that the kids poached all the plants. So I was quite angry because it was the only known population of the plants which could be Torellii. So this is all the plants that I showed you. You have, by alphabetical order, the 9 species with the lower pictures and upper pictures. They are similar, but you cannot say that it's the same species. They are variable. They are more or less look the same, but you can make differences. I published a key in the paper if you're interested. So this is the map with a distribution with all the species. I won't pretend that it's complete. We have to check Laos, Myanmar. Vietnam has not been really prospected either. So most of the species are really localized and threatened in the wild. Here, this is the location of Thi in Vietnam, where Torellii has been collected. It was supposed to be filled with swamps. All of the Torellii sheets indicated swamps of Thi, swamps of Ongiem, and now it's just paddy fields or rubber plantations, just like this. I couldn't find any Nepenthes Torellii out there. There's nothing left to see. And people told me we didn't see any nap am, any pitcher plants in Vietnamese for 30 years now. And I found some mirabilis with an old Vietnamese woman, and he said, I'm surprised because I didn't find any pitcher plants since I was a kid here. I didn't think that they were still growing in my hometown. But of course, no Torellii. So they are threatened by urbanization, by agriculture, and also by traditional medicine. So all these rubber plantations now. And the 5-6 last pictures, you have the trunk population of Nepenthes mirabilis var globosa. It's been destroyed just recently because they just built a road up there. So the mirabilis globosa from Trang almost disappeared. So you have them in culture, fortunately. And the last location is in Phnom Bokor that I first visited in 2007. It was quite a nice place, touristy. You could climb on a moto. It was a kind of a nice trip. And now it's just been turned out because they built a casino, resort, landing area for helicopters. So they destroyed most of the plants. And we are just interested in carnivorous plants, but there are many endemics, lizards, snakes, insects, and some small mammals, of course. So this is the Bokor area, and this is the plan for a great temporary master building project. So what I suggest in my humble way, like Alan said this morning, I don't think we can say, there's nothing we can really do ex situ right now. The government of Indochina, they don't care about the plans. They got national parks, but it's just a big joke, if you want my opinion. The Boko National Park is a national park, and they build a casino up there. So I think that we must keep the diversity of the species which are threatened, especially the lowland species, Andamana, suratensis, var globosa, and we have to introduce plant in cultivation, of course, with authorization, and I think that it's the responsibility of a nurseryman, of an horticulturist, nurseryman and woman, to correctly label the plants and clones, identify, number, and propagate it. I think that all we can really do now is the in situ program. Maybe in a few years we can set new plants in the wild, but that's what we can do now. So thank you, and I'd like to acknowledge some of my friends who helped me for all my work.